what do we mean by classical? When we speak of classical, there's really a lot packed into that single word. But let me begin by discussing that classical education recognizes that students learn according to certain developmental stages, that the youngest students love to absorb tons of information. They are built to absorb tons of information, and we recognize this. And so the foundational pieces of knowledge that we want them to have, that we think are essential building blocks, we emphasize at the youngest stages. And so the grammar stage of the classical trivium emphasizes jingles and chants, and through these, students learn information that they will build upon as they grow, and they absorb all of that information. And then as they move into the dialectic stage of the classical trivium, which would be equivalent to the middle school years approximately, when they move into this stage, they get to an age where they want to not just have a bunch of information in their head, but they want to understand this information and be able to discuss this information, debate about this information. And so in that dialectic stage, we recognize this, and so we emphasize formal logic and debate skills. And so our students have debate, and they learn the rules of logic, and they look at arguments, and they analyze them. And any parent would know that this is a natural age for students to want to understand more deeply and to want to argue. And we call it the dialectic stage because dialectic is a discourse. It's a discussion in search of the truth. So then we come to the third stage, the rhetoric stage. And the rhetoric stage is where students have learned those basic building blocks of the grammar stage, and then they've learned to think critically and to analyze in that dialectic stage. And then we move to the third stage of the classical trivium, and that's the rhetoric stage, and that's where students learn to express themselves and to speak beautifully and to communicate and to be persuasive. And so, in one sense, classical education is an education that follows this developmental program. That's a time-tested program that goes back well over 1,000 years, and it was used throughout the Middle Ages. And we think it simply fits and still works because people are people today just as they were over 1,000 years ago. In another sense, classical education is an acknowledgement that we are part of a long span of history, and there have been great thinkers who have gone before us, who have laid the foundations of the world in which we live today, the very way we speak, the very things we think, and the way that we think. And we want to acknowledge that. We want to be able to look to the greatest thinkers. We want to be able to engage with them. We want to recognize that these thinkers have shaped the world in which we live today, and we want to learn from them. We want to think critically about the things that they said and they believed and that they wrote, but we want to be able to engage with those great thinkers. We want to be able to understand the culture and the society in which we live, and we believe that learning from the greatest philosophers and theologians and scientists, natural philosophers who come from the past, that's the best place to go to understand the world in which we live today. I often tell my students that classical education is about getting the jokes. When someone says something, you want to be able to get the reference. When somebody says something and everybody else laughs, you want to be able to know what they're saying. And classical education really helps to be able to get the jokes and be able to understand the culture in which we live. And so classical education is about having a deep and rich understanding of our society, our culture. Who are the best thinkers? How can we learn from them? Where are their ideas consistent with Christian teaching, with what the Bible teaches us? And where perhaps do they go astray? And how can we critically engage and analyze so that we can be better citizens, better family members, better members of our churches, better Christians? How can we better faithfully serve our God?